Here's the another Sony TC199SD cassette deck from Sony. I don't know what it is. Lately, I've come across so many of these Sony tape decks, but in this particular one, I want to talk a little bit about the repair of cassette decks, vintage cassette decks. I've probably gone through hundreds of different cassette decks. Techniques, Pioneer, Nakamichi, Sansui, Akai, high-end ones, mid-level, and the entry-level ones. I've replaced belts, I've replaced motors, I've adjusted and replaced heads, I've re-rubberized all the different wheels, caps and wheels, I've replaced them. I've resoldered different capacitors in them, but I still would not call myself a technician. I did spend some time being mentored by a really good technician. Spent about 6 months with him learning what I can, and then most of my learning has just been through practice. Now, some of the steps that I go through, this cassette deck, when I got it, it lit up, but nothing moved. None of these functions move. Rewind, play, fast forward, record, nothing moved. Nothing would happen at all. So I opened it up. And what I recommend you do if you get a situation where nothing is moving and it is lit up, and the deck itself seems like it's in pretty good shape, then more than likely what is going on here is that the cassette deck is probably just sat idle for a long time, in some cases decades, so things just haven't been moving. So to open this up, you remove the wood paneling, and then that also holds on the top of it, and then the top comes off, the whole thing comes off, and then behind the tape transport in here, you'll have most of the belts and gears and what have you, and the motor. Now, so I took the top off, and this is what I do with all of them, and then I try to move the functions. And the first thing I do is check to see if the motor is moving. The motor in this deck is back about here. Now, in this particular one, the motor was not moving. There are two belts hooked up to the motor, one to the main capstan and the other one to the secondary ones that operate the fast forward and the rewind. So what I do at that point, and what I did with this one, because what you don't really want to do is replace things, because to replace things you have to take the transport apart and then put it all back together, and then you could run the possibility of damaging it, stripping some of the screws, losing some of the screws, or simply forgetting how to put it all back together. You go back to your schematics and you could end up being a problem. And then when you get it back together, if things are set in such a way that they need to be set exactly the same way, and if they're not, the sound quality or some of the functions could end up not working, even if you have replaced the belts. So what I do is I check the belts to make sure that they're still there, of course, that they haven't disintegrated and they still have some degree of tautness to them, and they're somewhat tight around where they should be. And in this case, this one it was. So then I just simply, the belts are from the motor and they're going to different gears on the transport. I simply move those gears a little bit back and forth, going slowly and slowly back, not too much. You don't want to damage anything, just sort of gently move back and forth and all the different things. So what I found after I did that would happen is that I would push play, it would run for a little bit, like maybe a couple rotations, and then stop. Fast forward and rewind, they still wouldn't work. So I worked the gears a little bit more. At this point, I haven't taken anything apart except just the top. Work it a little bit more, slowly moving all those little gears back and forth by hand. And then eventually, things click in, and we do have movement now. So it's rewind's perfect, fast forward's perfect, play, perfect. So what happened was with this cassette deck, and a lot of vintage cassette decks that you get, is people aren't using them. They're sitting around in garages, storage compartments, closets, and they're not being used, and they seize up when they're not being used. They need to be used quite regularly. Everything was good. Luckily, there's no replacements of belts required or the motors or anything like that. So you simply need to get the thing back to life. And so that's what I did with this particular one, and it worked. Now that doesn't always work. Sometimes you do need to replace belts. Sometimes you do need to fix damaged motors. Sometimes other adjustments are needed. But the first thing I would do is what I just described. Slowly go through all of the different gears and work them by hand just to get the life back together. Now that I've got this one working, what I am going to do is I'm going to open it back up again and clean everything out. With a Q-tip, probably using just a little bit of rubbing alcohol, clean all the old pieces out, and then apply a little bit of oil to the motor and a little bit of oil to some of the other springs and areas where you see in there, making sure you don't put any oil anywhere near where the belts go because you don't want those to slip. And then it should be good for some time to come. So that's what I do. And again, I am not a professional technician, but I've been doing, as I said, God, I would say close to over maybe 200-300 of these cassette decks. A lot of them are posted on my on this channel, the Say Hello Hello YouTube channel, but most of them aren't. Anyways, this is the Sony. I've been through what this one does. I think it's a very good deck. This is the Sony TC199SD. It's a very substantial deck. It's got some weight to it, and it's got lots of necessary functions here. I do have another video that talks a little bit more of the details of what this one does. So if you're interested in that, go and have a look. I just wanted to use this video just to talk a little bit about what I do when I get a vintage cassette deck in. Thanks for watching.